I slammed on the brakes in my driveway. A man's work truck, not mine, parked down the street. Coffee-stained footprints led from the back door straight through my house. My chest tightened. I grabbed the fireplace poker and followed the trail upstairs, straight to our bedroom. Strange noises from behind the door. My hand trembled with rage as I gripped the doorknob. One deep breath, then I threw it open. I'm Andrew Fleming, 68 years old, retired senior vice president from Merrill Lynch. For decades, I'd built wealth, respect, and a reputation for shrewd financial management. What I couldn't build was a family, not for lack of trying. I'd spent fortunes on fertility specialists from New York to California, undergone every procedure imaginable, swallowed vitamins and herbs by the handful. Nothing worked. My first wife left me after 15 years of trying, choosing the possibility of motherhood over our marriage. For 12 years after that, I lived alone in my colonial-style home in Greenwich, Connecticut. Then Rebecca walked into my life at a charity gala. 38 years old, blonde hair cascading past her shoulders, and a smile that could light up the eastern seaboard. The age difference raised eyebrows, but I've always maintained myself. Regular workouts, a strict diet, and the best cosmetic treatments money can buy. Most people guess I'm in my mid-40s. Rebecca said she loved my energy, my experience, my stability. We married after a 6-month whirlwind romance. She moved into my home, redecorated with impeccable taste, and filled the kitchen with the scent of her incredible baking. Her apple pies won first place at the local harvest festival 2 years running. I thought I'd found happiness at last. I remember the night I told her about my infertility. We'd been dating for 3 months, getting serious quickly. I'd invited her to my lake house in the Berkshires for the weekend, away from prying eyes and Greenwich gossip. After dinner on the deck overlooking the water, watching the sunset paint the sky in orange and purple strokes, I knew it was time. Rebecca, I said, taking her hands in mine, before we go any further, there's something you should know about me. She tilted her head, her blue eyes wide with concern. You can tell me anything, Andrew. I took a deep breath. This conversation had ended relationships before. I can't have children. I've tried. God knows I've tried everything. Multiple specialists, experimental treatments, even alternative medicine. But the verdict has always been the same. My sperm count is virtually non-existent. I waited for the flash of disappointment, the careful mask of acceptance that would hide her true feelings. Instead, she squeezed my hands tighter. Oh, Andrew, she whispered. I'm so sorry you've had to carry that burden. She reached up to touch my face gently. But I need to be honest with you, too. I've never wanted children of my own. I blinked in surprise. You haven't? She shook her head, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. I never had that maternal instinct some women have. I've always been focused on my career, on building a beautiful life. What I want is a partner, someone to share that life with. She leaned in closer. Someone like you. Relief flooded through me. My first wife had tried to hide her disappointment, had agreed to a childless future, but the longing never left her eyes. Eventually, it had driven us apart. You're sure? I pressed, because I've been down this road before. I don't want there to be any regrets. Andrew, Rebecca said firmly, the only thing I would regret is letting something like this come between us. We can have an amazing life together, just the two of us. I believed her. God help me, I believed every word. Now, I followed the coffee-stained footprints up my grand staircase, moving quietly despite the rage building inside me. The trail led past guest rooms, past my home office, right to the master bedroom. The door was closed, but I could hear muffled sounds from inside. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I hesitated. Did I really want to see what was happening on the other side? Could I bear the confirmation of my worst fears? For a moment, I considered turning around, pretending I'd never seen the footprints, never heard the sounds. But I've never been a coward. I threw the door open. Rebecca's startled scream pierced the air as she scrambled to cover herself with our Egyptian cotton sheets. Beside her, a muscular young man with dirt-stained hands lunged for his discarded jeans on the floor. Mr. Fleming, he stammered. It was Miguel, our gardener. The kid I paid $30 an hour to tend my prize roses and maintain the immaculate landscaping I took such pride in. I built this house with my own hands. I roared, though it wasn't technically true. I'd paid professionals handsomely, but I'd overseen every detail, chosen every fixture. This bedroom was designed for my retirement years. It's like a son to me. And you humiliated me so, Rebecca. How could you? The drama of the moment carried me away. Rebecca pulled the sheet tighter around her naked body, her perfectly made-up face now streaked with tears. Andrew, please, I can explain. Explain what? I snarled. How you've been fucking the gardener in our marital bed, while I've been nothing but devoted to you. Miguel had managed to pull on his pants and was reaching for his shirt. Mr. Fleming, sir, I'm so sorry. Get out. I said, my voice suddenly deadly quiet. Get out of my house before I call the police. He grabbed the rest of his clothes and bolted past me, leaving Rebecca and me alone. His coffee-stained work boots remained by the bed, damning evidence of their tryst. How long? I asked. Rebecca's mascara ran down her cheeks. Andrew, it was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. How long? She flinched. 3 months. 3 months. While I'd been bringing her breakfast in bed on Sunday mornings. While I'd been planning our anniversary trip to Bora Bora. While I'd been loving her with every fiber of my being. Pack a bag, I told her. You're sleeping in the guest room tonight. We'll figure out what happens next tomorrow. That was the beginning of the worst period of my life. I didn't kick Rebecca out immediately. Call me old-fashioned, but despite her betrayal, I'd made vows. For better or worse, I'd promised. This was certainly the worst part, and perhaps some small part of me still loved her, still wanted to believe we could work through this somehow. For 2 weeks, we lived like ghosts in the same house. I threw myself into yard work, ripping out every plant Miguel had ever touched and replacing it myself, despite my arthritic knees screaming in protest. Rebecca tried to talk to me several times, but I couldn't bear to hear her voice. The whole situation reminded me of what had happened with Maria, our housekeeper of 15 years. Maria had been with me since before Rebecca, a loyal employee who knew every corner of my home, every preference I had. She'd been like family to me during my years alone. 6 months into our marriage, Rebecca had come to me with disturbing news. Andrew, I need to speak with you about Maria, she'd said, her voice shaking. She wrung her hands nervously in her lap as we sat in my study. What about her? I asked, looking up from my financial reports. I think she's been putting something in my food. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. I've been getting sick, but only after meals she prepares for me when you're not home. I set down my papers, alarmed. That's a serious accusation, Rebecca. I know, she whispered. I didn't want to believe it. But yesterday I caught her sprinkling something into my salad when she thought I wasn't looking. When I confronted her, she got defensive and started speaking rapid Spanish. I couldn't understand her, but her tone was frightening. I'd frowned, trying to reconcile this with the Maria I'd known for years. Did you save any of the food? We could have it tested. I was too scared, Rebecca admitted. I threw it away. But look, she pulled up her sleeve to reveal a rash on her forearm. The doctor says it could be a reaction to something I ingested, and it only happens when Maria cooks for me. The evidence seemed circumstantial, but the rash was real enough. And Rebecca had no reason to lie about such a thing. Or so I thought. I'll speak with Maria. I promised. The conversation had been painful. Maria had worked for me faithfully, had helped me through my divorce, had never once given me reason to doubt her integrity. She denied the accusations vehemently, tears streaming down her weathered face. Senor Fleming, never would I hurt anyone in this house. La Senora does not like me. That is all. She wants her own people here. In the end, I'd had to make a choice between my new wife and my longtime employee. With great reluctance, I let Maria go with a generous severance package. The look of betrayal in her eyes as she left my house for the last time had haunted me for weeks. It wasn't until after Rebecca's arrest that I learned the truth. Detective Mullins had interviewed Maria as part of the investigation into Rebecca's past. Your former housekeeper had some interesting insights, the detective told me. According to Maria, Mrs. Fleming had been going through your financial records, asking questions about your will and life insurance policies within weeks of your marriage. When Maria expressed concern, suddenly these poisoning accusations emerged. The rash that had seemed such damning evidence? Rebecca had created herself using poison ivy from our garden, deliberately exposing herself after firing Maria's replacement for unsatisfactory work. It had been step one in her long-term plan, removing anyone loyal to me from our household and replacing them with people who wouldn't question her actions. I dismissed a woman who had served me faithfully for 15 years based on the lies of a woman who was plotting to kill me. The realization was another bitter pill to swallow. Then came the morning. I found her hunched over the toilet, retching violently. Food poisoning. She explained weakly when she saw me standing in the doorway. But it happened again the next day, and the day after that, always in the morning. 1 week later, she cornered me in the kitchen as I was making my morning coffee. Andrew, we need to talk, she said, twisting her wedding ring anxiously. I'm pregnant. The mug slipped from my fingers for the second time that month, shattering on the hardwood floor. That's impossible, I whispered. I can't. I know, she said, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know how it happened. Maybe all those treatments finally worked. Maybe it's a miracle. A miracle. After decades of trying. After being told by the best specialists in the country that I had less than a 0.1% chance of ever fathering a child. Could it really be? Or was it Miguel's? The question hung between us, unspoken but deafening. I want to believe it's yours, Andrew, Rebecca said, reaching for my hand. I've ended things with Miguel completely. I made a terrible mistake, but please, can we try to save our marriage? For our baby? Our baby. The words I'd longed to hear for most of my adult life. I wanted to believe. God, how I wanted to believe. Despite my anger, despite my humiliation, the prospect of becoming a father at 68 was intoxicating. All those years of heartbreak and disappointment, erased in an instant. I need time to think, I told her. I stopped sleeping with Rebecca, of course, but I didn't kick her out. Instead, I watched her pregnancy develop with a mixture of hope and suspicion. I drove her to doctor's appointments, but waited in the car. I bought prenatal vitamins, but left them on the counter without a word. I found myself staring at her growing belly when she wasn't looking, wondering if my DNA was really woven into the life growing inside her. After a month of this silent torture, Rebecca seemed to take my continued presence as forgiveness. She started cooking my favorite meals again, leaving freshly baked cookies on my desk, bringing me coffee in the mornings, always with a splash of cream and 2 sugars, just how I liked it. I drank the coffee, ate the meals, but kept my distance emotionally. Something didn't feel right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. As her belly grew, so did my unease. And something else was happening. I didn't feel well. At first, I attributed it to stress. My sleep was terrible, my appetite diminished. But by the 3rd month after Rebecca's announcement, I was noticeably thinner. My skin had a grayish tinge. My hands trembled slightly when I tried to button my shirts. You should see a doctor, Rebecca suggested one morning, handing me my coffee. You don't look well. I brushed off her concern, but privately, I was worried. I'd always been healthy as a horse, prided myself on maintaining my vitality well into my 60s. Now, at 68, I suddenly felt every year my age and more. When I nearly collapsed while collecting the mail one afternoon, I finally made an appointment with my physician, Dr. Peterson, who'd been managing my health for over 20 years. After a battery of tests, he called me back with confusion in his voice. Andrew, are you taking any medications I don't know about? Just the usual, I said. Blood pressure, cholesterol, the multivitamin you recommended. Your blood work shows elevated levels of arsenic, he said gravely. Not immediately life-threatening, but concerning. If this continues, we could be looking at serious organ damage. Arsenic. I repeated, stunned. How would that get into my system? It can be found in some foods, particularly seafood, but these levels suggest regular exposure. Do you work with any chemicals? Any home renovations using pressure-treated wood? New carpet? I answered no to all his questions, increasingly bewildered. I want you to stop eating at home for a while, Dr. Peterson advised. Eat out or prepare your own food with bottled water. Come back in 2 weeks for another test. I followed his instructions, making excuses to Rebecca about business lunches and dinners with old colleagues. I bought bottled water and kept in my car, drinking nothing from our home. I even began brewing my own coffee in my office using the water I purchased. 2 weeks later, my follow-up blood test showed significantly reduced arsenic levels. Whatever you were exposed to, you eliminated it, Dr. Peterson said, relief evident in his voice. But I'm concerned about how this happened in the first place. So was I. That night, I sat in my darkened home office, thinking back over the past months. Rebecca's pregnancy, my illness, her sudden solicitousness after I discovered her affair, the coffee. Every morning, without fail, she brought me coffee. The next day, after Rebecca left for her prenatal yoga class, I searched our house from top to bottom, in her bathroom, hidden behind feminine products under the sink, items she knew I'd never touch. I found a small, unmarked bottle of white powder. With shaking hands, I took a sample and drove it to a private lab 1 town over, paying cash for an immediate analysis. The results confirmed my worst fears. Arsenic compound. My wife wasn't just a cheater. She was trying to kill me. I sat in my car in the lab's parking lot, numb with shock. The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. Rebecca's affair with Miguel, her miraculous pregnancy, her sudden concern for my health even as she poisoned me day by day. She wanted my money. Connecticut is an equitable distribution state. As my wife, she'd be entitled to a significant portion of my estate if I died. If she could pass off Miguel's child as mine, the baby would inherit as well. I drove home in a fog of betrayal and rage, pulled into our circular driveway, and nearly collided with our garbage cans at the sight that greeted me. Rebecca stood in our front yard, belly prominent under her maternity dress, watering flowers. Miguel's truck was parked on the street. I sat watching them for nearly 30 minutes. They never touched, never spoke intimately. It all looked perfectly innocent. The pregnant wife and the gardener go about their business. But I knew, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I waited until Rebecca went inside before approaching Miguel, who was trimming the hedges along our property line. Beautiful day, I remarked casually. He nearly jumped out of his skin. Mr. Fleming. Yes, sir, it is. My roses are looking particularly good this year, I continued, gesturing to beds I'd replanted after discovering their affair. I've always had a knack for nurturing things, unlike some people who only know how to destroy. Miguel's dark eyes darted nervously toward the house. Sir, tell me, Miguel, I said, dropping all pretense. When the baby is born, were you planning to be involved? Or were you going to let Rebecca pass it off as mine while she slowly poisoned me to death? The color drained from his face. Mr. Fleming, I don't know what you're talking about. Save it, I snapped. I know everything. The affair, the baby, the arsenic in my coffee. What I don't know is whether you're complicit in the murder attempt or just the adultery. He looked genuinely shocked at the mention of poison. Murder? No, I swear, I didn't know anything about that. But you did know she was claiming the baby was mine? He hesitated, then nodded miserably. She said it would be better for everyone this way. That you always wanted a child, and I couldn't afford child support on what I make. I studied him, trying to determine if he was telling the truth. He seemed more pathetic than malicious. A young man who'd made a terrible decision and was now in over his head. Here's what's going to happen, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. You're going to tell me everything Rebecca has said to you about me, about the baby, about our future. And then you're going to disappear from our lives. Find another town to work in. In return, I won't press charges against you for trespassing and destruction of property. Destruction of... You've been fucking my wife in my home, I growled. That's destruction of my property, in my book. For the next hour, Miguel spilled everything. How Rebecca had seduced him one afternoon while I was golfing. How she told him I was cruel behind closed doors, that I controlled all the money, that she was trapped in a loveless marriage. How she'd recently told him not to worry about the baby because nature would take its course with me soon enough. She said your heart was weak, he whispered, that the doctor said you wouldn't live to see the baby born. My heart was as strong as an ox, according to my last physical. Another lie in Rebecca's web of deception. After Miguel left, for the last time, I went inside and headed straight for my home office, locking the door behind me. I had preparations to make. I called James Harrington, my attorney of 30 years, and scheduled an urgent meeting for the following morning. Then I called Martin Reeves, the best private investigator in New England, and retained his services on the spot. I need surveillance, documentation, and absolute discretion, I told him. You'll have it, Martin promised. That night at dinner, I watched Rebecca eat the meal she prepared for us, her fake pregnancy belly perfectly positioned under her flowing maternity dress. I now suspected the belly was as false as everything else about her. You seem distracted, she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I forced a smile. Just thinking about the future. Our future. The baby will be here before we know it, she said, patting her stomach lovingly. Are you excited, Andrew? More than you can imagine, I replied, raising my water glass in a toast. To new beginnings. If only she knew what kind of beginning I had in mind. The next morning, I kissed Rebecca goodbye as usual, told her I had a medical appointment, and drove to James Harrington's office in downtown Greenwich. Andrew, he greeted me gravely. You sounded urgent on the phone. What's happened? I laid it all out for him. The affair, the fake pregnancy, the poison. I showed him the lab results and the pictures I'd taken of the arsenic hidden in our bathroom. James, normally unflappable, looked stunned. My God, Andrew, have you gone to the police? Not yet, I said. I need to build an airtight case first. I can't risk her getting away with this. For the next hour, we crafted a strategy that would not only end my marriage, but ensure Rebecca faced the full legal consequences of her actions. Justice would be served, but it would be precise, calculated, and absolutely devastating. This won't be easy, James warned. Or quick. I've got time, I replied grimly. I'm not drinking her coffee anymore. As I left his office, my phone buzzed with a text from Martin Reeves. Surveillance in place. Will report daily. The game was afoot. Rebecca thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She was about to learn that I'd been a grandmaster all along. The next 3 weeks were performance of my lifetime. I smiled at Rebecca over breakfast, complimented her expanding baby bump, and pretended to drink the coffee she prepared for me each morning. In reality, I poured it into a special container I kept hidden in my briefcase for evidence. You're looking better, she said one morning, watching me closely as I raised the poison cup to my lips. The color is coming back to your face. I feel great. I lied. Maybe I'm just excited about becoming a father. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head, wondering why her poison wasn't working as quickly as she'd hoped. Meanwhile, Martin Reeves was earning every penny of his considerable fee. His surveillance revealed that Rebecca met Miguel twice a week in a motel off the interstate, always during her supposed prenatal yoga classes. More damning still, he caught her removing her fake pregnancy belly in the motel parking lot before her rendezvous. Pregnancy prosthetic, Martin explained, showing me the photos. Actresses use them in movies. Very realistic. And expensive, I noted, studying the images of Rebecca carefully strapping the silicone belly under her clothes. This one's top of the line. Around $2,000. I laughed bitterly. Paid for with my money, no doubt. Martin also traced Rebecca's movements to a specialized pharmacy in New York City, where she'd purchased the arsenic compound, paying cash but captured clearly on security footage. The pharmacist remembered her. She claimed to be a metal worker needing the chemical for a patina technique. By the end of the third week, I had a comprehensive dossier. Timestamps, photographs, video clips, pharmacy records, and chemical analysis of the coffee samples I'd been collecting. I'd also secretly recorded several conversations where Rebecca discussed her fake pregnancy and her frustration that my health was improving instead of deteriorating. It's not working fast enough. She complained to someone on the phone when she thought I was at the gym. He should be better than by now. I can't keep wearing this stupid belly forever. I brought everything to James Harrington, who whistled low when he reviewed the evidence. This is the most premeditated case of attempted murder I've seen in 30 years of practice, he said. And the fraud with the pregnancy, she could be looking at significant prison time. I want it all handled by the book. I instructed. No shortcuts. When we take her down, I want it to be airtight. James nodded. We'll need to coordinate with the police. Attempted murder isn't something we can handle privately. That night, Detective Sarah Mullins came to my office downtown, neutral territory where Rebecca wouldn't see us meeting. She reviewed our evidence with growing disgust. Mr. Fleming, why didn't you come to us sooner? She's been poisoning you for months. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. I replied. And frankly, Detective, I needed to be sure. You don't spend 30 years with someone and immediately believe they're trying to kill you. 30 years? She asked, confused. Figure speech. I amended. 2 years of marriage. But it feels like I've aged 3 decades since discovering the truth. We devised a plan. For another week, I would continue collecting evidence while police quietly built their case. Then, on a day when both Rebecca and Miguel were scheduled to meet at their motel, they would strike. We'll need one more piece of evidence, Detective Mullins explained. We need to catch her in the act of administering the poison. The following morning, I set up a hidden camera in our kitchen, angled perfectly to capture the coffee preparation area. Then I announced to Rebecca that I had early meetings all week and would need to leave before she woke up. I'll miss our morning coffee together, she pouted, running her hand along my shoulder. I resisted the urge to shudder at her touch. I'll miss it too, sweetheart, but you need your rest for the baby. The next morning, the camera caught her red-handed. Rebecca came downstairs, prepared a single cup of coffee, and then, looking carefully around the kitchen first, pulled a small vial from her robe pocket and tapped white powder into the mug. She stirred it thoroughly, smiled to herself, and left it on the counter with a note. For my hard-working husband, don't forget to drink this. Love, R. I took the coffee straight to the police station, where they confirmed it contained enough arsenic to cause severe organ damage if consumed regularly. We're ready to move, Detective Mullins said. Tomorrow's the day. I barely slept that night, lying in the guest room where I'd been staying since discovering the affair. Down the hall, Rebecca slept peacefully in our master bedroom, unaware that her house of cards was about to collapse. The next morning, she kissed me goodbye, patted her fake belly, and reminded me that she had her yoga class at noon. Don't work too hard, she called as I walked to my car. Remember what the doctor said about stress. I smiled and waved. I'm feeling much better these days, actually. Maybe we should celebrate tonight. Dinner at Piermont's? Her eyes widened slightly. Piermont's was the most expensive restaurant in town. That sounds wonderful. I'll see you at 7? Perfect, I replied. As soon as she was out of sight, I called Detective Mullins. She's leaving for the motel at noon. At 12:30, I sat in an unmarked police car with Detective Mullins and another officer, parked across from the Lakeside Motel. We watched as Rebecca pulled her Lexus, paid for by me, into a spot next to Miguel's truck. She got out, looked around carefully, and then reached back into the car for a bag. She walked to room 114 and knocked. Wait for it, Detective Mullins murmured into her radio. Miguel opened the door, checked the parking lot, and then pulled Rebecca inside. Through the thin curtains, we could see them embracing. Now, Detective Mullins commanded. Police officers converged on the motel room from all directions. I stayed in the car as instructed, watching as they broke down the door with a battering ram. Seconds later, they emerged with Rebecca in handcuffs, her fake pregnancy belly askew beneath her partially unbuttoned blouse. Miguel followed, also in handcuffs, looking shell-shocked. Rebecca spotted me in the police car and went ballistic, screaming profanities and threats as the officers forced her into a squad car. You'll never prove anything, she shrieked. It's my word against yours. I smiled thinly and held up my phone, where I recorded her earlier confession about the poison not working fast enough. Her face went from rage to terror in an instant. Game over, Rebecca, I said, though I knew she couldn't hear me through the car windows. The police search of her purse revealed a vial of arsenic powder, along with handwritten notes detailing doses and expected symptoms. In our home, they found research on arsenic poisoning, printouts about untraceable poisons, and, most damning of all, a draft letter to my life insurance company, dated 6 months in the future, inquiring about how to claim benefits after my long illness. Rebecca and Miguel were processed separately at the Greenwich Police Department. I gave my statement, provided all the evidence we'd gathered, and listened as James Harrington explained the charges. Attempted murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit fraud, adultery, still a crime in Connecticut, though rarely prosecuted, and a host of lesser charges. They'll likely offer Miguel a deal to testify against Rebecca, James explained. From what we've heard, he was involved in the affair and the pregnancy fraud, but not the poisoning. He's looking at maybe 2 to 3 years. Rebecca, on the other hand, how much time is she facing? I asked, with this level of premeditation? 25 to life, James said grimly. Connecticut doesn't mess around with attempted murder, especially when it's this calculated. The story broke that evening. Wealthy retired executive's wife arrested in murder plot screamed the headlines. Our house was surrounded by news vans by sunset. I checked into the Delamar Hotel under an assumed name, needing privacy to process the implosion of my life. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week. Rebecca, unable to make the $1 million bail, remained in custody. Miguel was released on a lower bail, reportedly paid by his family, who had mortgaged their home to help him. I spent the intervening days putting my affairs in order. I filed for divorce immediately, citing intolerable cruelty, and presenting the evidence of Rebecca's affair and poisoning attempts. The judge fast-tracked the proceedings given the extraordinary circumstances. In Connecticut, adultery can be grounds for an at-fault divorce, which can impact property division. Between that and the criminal charges, Rebecca had no legal standing to claim any portion of my assets. James assured me that the divorce would be finalized quickly and cleanly. She's not getting a penny, he promised. Not with what she's done. I also had all the locks changed at the house, her belongings packed by a service and placed in storage, and her name removed from all my accounts. I updated my will, removing any mention of Rebecca, and instead dividing my considerable estate between my alma mater and several medical research foundations focusing on male fertility issues. On the day of the preliminary hearing, I walked into the courthouse with my head held high, flanked by James and 2 other attorneys from his firm. The courtroom fell silent as I entered. Rebecca, dressed in an orange jumpsuit rather than her usual designer clothes, kept her eyes on the table in front of her. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The prosecution presented the coffee samples, the surveillance footage, the recorded conversations, and the pharmacy records. They showed the jury the fake pregnancy belly, explaining how she had planned to use a non-existent baby to lay claim to my estate after my untimely death. When it was Miguel's turn to testify, he could barely look at me or Rebecca. As James had predicted, he'd accepted a plea deal in exchange for his testimony. He admitted to the affair, confirmed that Rebecca had never been pregnant, and testified that she had spoken often about my supposed heart condition and how she would be a wealthy widow soon. She said Mr. Fleming wouldn't make it to Christmas. Miguel testified in a shaking voice. She said it would look like natural causes, that no one would suspect anything because of his age. Rebecca's attorney tried to paint her as a victim of my controlling behavior, claiming she felt trapped in our marriage and desperate to escape. The strategy backfired spectacularly when the prosecution produced Rebecca's credit card statements showing spa days, shopping sprees, and luxury purchases averaging $30,000 per month, hardly the finances of an oppressed spouse. The judge ruled that there was more than sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. Rebecca was returned to custody, her bail request denied again due to flight risk concerns. The trial date was set for 3 months later. Those 3 months were a strange time of limbo for me. I rattled around my large house alone, avoiding the pitying glances of neighbors who had read about my humiliation in the papers. I returned to my therapist, who helped me process the betrayal and violation I'd experienced. It's not your fault, Dr. Lieberman kept telling me. Sociopaths are expert manipulators. They can fool anyone. I'm not just anyone, I argued. I ran a financial empire. I was paid millions to read people, to know when I was being conned. You were looking for love, she said gently. That makes even the smartest people vulnerable. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life. I redecorated the master bedroom, unable to sleep there with memories of Rebecca and Miguel. I traveled to visit old friends, reconnected with colleagues, even had dinner with my ex-wife who, despite our difficult history, was horrified by what Rebecca had done to me. I left because we wanted different things, she told me over wine. Not because I wanted you dead. I laughed for the first time in months. Good to know where you draw the line. When the trial finally began, it was a media sensation. Black Widow of Greenwich. The tabloids called her Becca. Every day, I sat in the same seat in the courtroom, facing her directly, refusing to show any weakness. The prosecution built a methodical case, presenting evidence day after day of Rebecca's calculated plan to murder me. They showed the jury the fraudulent pregnancy documentation she'd created, complete with forged medical records. They played recordings of her complaining to friends about my stubborn refusal to die, despite her best efforts. Most chilling was a testimony from her former roommate, who described how Rebecca had researched wealthy older men, specifically targeting those with no children who might inherit their fortunes. She had a whole system, the roommate testified. She would research their net worth, their health status, whether they had family. Andrew Fleming was perfect in her eyes. Rich, no children, no close family, and desperate for companionship after years alone. Rebecca took the stand in her own defense, against her attorney's advice. She wept dramatically, claiming that I had been emotionally abusive, that she'd feared for her safety, that the arsenic was for a craft project and must have accidentally contaminated my coffee. If I wanted to kill Andrew, why would I use something that would be detected in his blood work? She argued, her voice trembling just enough to appear genuine to those who didn't know her acting skills. The prosecution's rebuttal was devastating. Because, Ms. Wilson, you selected a poison that mimics natural causes in older individuals. Low doses of arsenic cause symptoms that resemble age-related decline, weakness, confusion, digestive issues. You didn't expect Mr. Fleming to seek medical attention until it was too late. You didn't expect him to survive long enough to have his blood tested. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours before returning with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, addressed Rebecca directly before sentencing. In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen many acts of violence and betrayal. But your calculated plan to slowly poison your husband while pretending to care for him, while sleeping with another man in his bed, while planning to use a fraudulent pregnancy to lay claim to his estate. This represents a depth of depravity that shocks even this court. She sentenced Rebecca to 15 years in prison with eligibility for parole after serving 8 years, followed by 10 years of supervised release, a substantial but realistic sentence for attempted first-degree murder in Connecticut. You'll also face additional penalties for the fraud charges to be served concurrently, the judge added severely. As Rebecca was led away in handcuffs, she turned to look at me one last time. I met her gaze steadily, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. The woman who had shared my bed, my home, my life for 2 years was a stranger to me now, a predator who had selected me as prey. During the trial, Rebecca's past had come to light in ways that shocked even me. The prosecution had uncovered a pattern that stretched back years before she met me. Born Rebecca in Lawson in a small Ohio town, she had changed her name to Rebecca Wilson after her first marriage to a dentist 30 years her senior ended with his accidental death, a fall down the stairs that was investigated but never proven suspicious. The insurance payment wasn't large, but it funded her move to Connecticut and her carefully crafted new identity. The investigators discovered she had dated 3 wealthy older men before me, each relationship ending before marriage, but not before she'd extracted expensive gifts and cash. She had studied websites and forums dedicated to inheritance laws, life insurance policies, and undetectable poisons, searches dating back 5 years before we'd even met. Most chilling was a journal they found in a storage unit rented under her maiden name. It detailed her retirement plan, as she called it, finding and marrying a wealthy man with no heirs, ensuring he died of seemingly natural causes, and living off his fortune. She had spreadsheets ranking potential targets by net worth, health status, and isolation level. I had scored a perfect 10 on her predatory scale. She selected you carefully. Detective Mullins told me after the journal was introduced as evidence. She researched your first wife's departure, your fertility issues, your lack of close family. You were ideal, wealthy enough to set her up for life, lonely enough to be susceptible to her attention, and with medical history that would make a gradual decline seem natural. The prosecution's forensic accountant testified that Rebecca had siphoned nearly $800,000 from our joint accounts over 2 years, transferring it through a series of shells to offshore accounts. Her plan, apparently, was to have a financial cushion ready for after my death, in addition to what she'd inherit. She had even befriended my doctor's receptionist to gain information about my medical appointments and history. The receptionist, feeling guilty after Rebecca's arrest, admitted that she had shared details about my health in exchange for expensive lunches and a designer handbag, a serious HIPAA violation that cost her a job and resulted in separate charges. Miguel, it turned out, had been more pawn than partner. 12 years Rebecca's junior, he had genuinely believed her stories about being trapped in a controlling marriage. The prosecution found text messages where she had manipulated with lies about my alleged mistreatment, interspersed with promises of a future together once I was out of the picture. You'll never have to mow another lawn, she had texted him just 3 weeks before her arrest. Soon we'll have enough money to go anywhere, do anything. Outside the courthouse, Reporters shouted questions as I descended the steps with James at my side. Mr. Fleming, how does it feel to know your wife tried to kill you? Mr. Fleming, did you suspect anything before discovering the affair? I paused, considering whether to speak. James raised an eyebrow, warning me to be careful with my words. Justice has been served, I said simply. Now I intend to move forward with my life. But there was one more thing I needed to do before I could truly close this chapter. One final act of justice that would go beyond Rebecca's criminal sentence. I had filed a civil lawsuit against her, seeking damages for emotional distress, fraud, and the intentional infliction of physical harm. With her criminal conviction secured, the civil case was open and shut. The judge awarded me $5.2 million in damages. She doesn't have that kind of money, James pointed out, even with what she stole from you over the years. I know, I replied. That's not the point. The point was that Rebecca would never profit from her crimes, not even indirectly. Any book deals, movie rights, paid interviews, all that money would come to me first to satisfy the judgment against her. She would spend her decades in prison knowing that her story, the only thing she had left to sell, belonged to me. It was a small consolation for what she put me through, but it closed the circle. She had tried to take everything from me, my health, my home, my wealth, my life. In the end, she had lost everything instead. 3 months after the trial ended, I stood alone in my bedroom, looking at myself in the mirror. The gaunt, gray-faced man I'd become during Rebecca's poisoning was gone. I had regained weight, my color was back, and, according to Dr. Peterson, my organs showed no signs of permanent damage. You're lucky, he'd told me during my last checkup. If you hadn't caught this when you did, luck had nothing to do with it. Vigilance, suspicion, and a refusal to ignore the evidence in front of me. That's what had saved my life. I straightened my tie, grabbed my briefcase, and headed out to my car. Life was moving forward again. I had meetings with my financial advisors, lunch with an old friend, and later, dinner with a widow I'd met to my country club. A pleasant, age-appropriate woman with grown children and grandchildren of her own. Nothing serious, just companionship, without ulterior motives. As I backed out of my driveway, I glanced at the for sale sign on my lawn. Too many memories in this house. Too much betrayal soaked into its walls. I was downsizing to a luxury condo overlooking the harbor. Easier to maintain, better security, and most importantly, no garden requiring a gardener. My phone rang through the car speakers. It was James. Just checking in, he said. The last of Rebecca's appeals was denied this morning. It's really over, Andrew. I smiled as I turned onto Main Road, heading toward my future. No, James. It's just beginning. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions as I descended the steps with James at my side. Mr. Fleming, how does it feel to know your wife tried to kill you? Mr. Fleming, did you suspect anything before discovering the affair? I paused, considering whether to speak. James raised an eyebrow, warning me to be careful with my words. Justice has been served, I said simply. Now I intend to move forward with my life. What the reporters didn't know, what no one knew except James and me, was that Rebecca's criminal conviction was just the beginning of my plan. Criminal justice would put her behind bars, but civil justice would ensure she never profited from what she'd done to me. That evening, I met with James in his office to discuss the next phase of our strategy. The civil suit is already drafted, he told me, sliding a thick folder across his desk. We're seeking damages for fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, physical harm, and theft. I flipped through the meticulously prepared document. How much are we asking for? $8 million, James replied. It's high, but defensible given the extent of her actions and the impact on your health and reputation. I nodded, satisfied. And the restraining order? Filed simultaneously. It prohibits her from contacting you in any way. No letters, no phone calls, no messages through third parties. It also covers any future publications, interviews, or media appearances where she discusses you or your marriage. Good, I said. I want her completely excised from my life. James leaned back in his chair. There's something else we should discuss. The state's Victim Compensation Fund contacted me today. With Rebecca's conviction, you're eligible for certain benefits. Counseling services, security system installation, relocation assistance if needed. I waved my hand dismissively. I don't need financial help. It's not about the money, Andrew. It's about establishing you as a victim in official records. That status could be useful for civil case and any future legal issues that might arise. He was right, of course. In situations like this, documentation matters. I agreed to file the necessary paperwork. The next morning, I had another important meeting. This one with Maria, my former housekeeper who had been wrongfully dismissed because of Rebecca's lies. She arrived at the small cafe I'd chosen, looking older than when I'd last seen her, her eyes wary. Senor Fleming, she said formally as she sat across from me. Maria, I replied, thank you for coming. A heavy silence hung between us. I had rehearsed this conversation in my head, but now the words felt inadequate. I owe you an apology. I finally said, I should have believed you. I should have known you would never harm anyone in my household. Maria's eyes softened slightly. The police detective told me everything. That woman, she was very convincing with her lies. Yes, she was. I cleared my throat. I can't undo what happened, but I can try to make it right. I'd like to offer you your position back, with a significant raise, and compensation for the time you've been away. Maria considered me carefully. You were good to me for many years, Senor Fleming, but I have a new position now with a family in Stamford. They need me. I nodded, understanding. Of course. I respect that. But please, I slid an envelope across the table. This is for you. Consider it the retirement package you would have received had you stayed with me until the end of your working years. She opened the envelope, her eyes widening at the check inside. $250,000. Senor Fleming, I cannot accept this. Please, I interrupted. It's not charity, Maria. It's what you earned through your years of loyal service. It's what you deserved. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded slowly. Gracias. We spent the next hour catching up. She told me about her grandchildren, showed me photos on her phone of smiling children who called her Abuela. I told her about the trial, about Rebecca's conviction. By the time we parted, something had been mended between us. Not completely healed, perhaps, but no longer broken. The civil case against Rebecca moved forward with remarkable speed, partly due to her criminal conviction and partly due to James's expert legal maneuvering. The judge, reviewing the overwhelming evidence, granted summary judgment without a full trial. Rebecca was ordered to pay $4.5 million in damages. Less than we'd asked for, but still a crushing amount. Of course, she didn't have that kind of money. What she did have, however, was seized immediately. The expensive jewelry I'd given her, designer clothing, her luxury car, and the offshore accounts Martin Reeves had uncovered containing the nearly $800,000 she'd siphoned from our joint finances. The judgment will follow her forever, James explained. Any income she earns after prison will be subject to garnishment. Any inheritance she might receive, any lottery winnings, any book or movie deals about this case, it all comes to you first. It wasn't about the money. I had more than enough to last several lifetimes. It was about ensuring Rebecca never benefited from her crimes, never turned her attempted murder into profit. It was about closing every possible loophole she might try to exploit. With the legal battles concluded, I found myself at loose ends. The house that had once felt like my sanctuary now seemed tainted by memories of betrayal. Every room contained echoes of Rebecca's presence, from the curtains she'd selected to the artwork she'd insisted would appreciate and value. Even the garden, replanted though it was, reminded me of Miguel and their trysts. After much consideration, I decided to sell the property. The real estate market in Greenwich was strong, and despite the house's notorious recent history, it sold within 3 weeks to a young hedge fund manager who was more interested in the property's prestigious address than its scandalous past. I purchased a sleek, modern penthouse overlooking Long Island Sound, a complete departure from colonial style I preferred for decades. Floor-to-ceiling windows erased the claustrophobic feeling that had haunted me since discovering Rebecca's poisoning attempt. Nothing in the new space had been touched by her hands, selected by her taste, or tainted by her presence. 6 months after Rebecca's sentencing, I received a call from Detective Mullins. I thought you should know, she said. Rebecca Wilson was attacked in prison yesterday. My grip tightened on the phone. Is she dead? No. Superficial wounds mostly, but she'll have a scar across her face. Apparently, her cellmate discovered she'd been poisoning women's husbands for money and took exception. I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no concern, not even surprise. Thanks for letting me know. There's something else, Detective Mullins continued. The prison censors intercepted a letter she was trying to smuggle out to a tabloid reporter. She was offering to tell her side of the story in exchange for payment to an account in her mother's name. Of course she was, I said wearily, always looking for an angle. Don't worry. It's been confiscated as evidence of attempted fraud, and we flagged her mother's accounts. She won't be able to get around the financial restrictions. After hanging up, I stood at my window watching boats glide across the Sound, considering the information. I'd expected Rebecca to try something like this eventually. She was nothing if not persistent. But thanks to the restraining order and the civil judgment, any attempt to profit from her crimes would only result in more legal consequences. I was surprised to realize I felt sorry for her in a way. Rebecca was undeniably intelligent, capable, and driven. Had she channeled those qualities into legitimate endeavors, she might have achieved remarkable success. Instead, she'd chosen a path of deception and predation that left her scarred, imprisoned, and utterly alone. Mr. Fleming? I turned to see my new housekeeper, Elizabeth, standing in the doorway. Unlike the young, attractive assistants Rebecca had hired after forcing Maria out, Elizabeth was in her 60s, with sensible shoes and no-nonsense glasses. She came with impeccable references from a family she'd served for 30 years, until their relocation to Europe. Yes, Elizabeth? Your lunch is ready, and Mr. Harrington called to confirm your meeting at 3. Thank you. As I ate the simple but perfectly prepared meal, I reviewed the documents James had sent over earlier. With Rebecca's legal matters concluded, I had decided to focus on more positive endeavors. I was establishing a foundation for male fertility research, funding a scholarship at my alma mater, and developing a clinic specializing in arsenic poisoning treatment and detection. The irony wasn't lost on me. Rebecca's murder attempt would ultimately save other lives through improved medical knowledge. At 73, most of my contemporaries were settling into quiet retirement, playing golf, and doting on grandchildren. But I felt reinvigorated, driven by a newfound purpose. Nearly dying has a way of clarifying one's priorities. The afternoon meeting with James wasn't about Rebecca or legal matters. It was about setting up the various charitable entities that would carry my legacy forward, a legacy of healing and opportunity, rather than bitterness and revenge. These foundation documents look good, James said after reviewing them. But I have to ask, are you sure about the funding levels? This represents a significant portion of your estate. I'm sure, I replied. What else am I going to do with it? I have no children, no close family. And after Rebecca, I'm not exactly eager to marry again and risk another gold digger. James chuckled. Fair enough. Speaking of Rebecca, there's been a development. Her attorney approached me about a settlement offer. I frowned. Settlement? The case is closed. She lost. This is different. She wants to make a deal. Her complete silence about you and your marriage in exchange for you dropping a restraining order regarding media appearances. She thinks she can still sell her story if she positions it as a cautionary tale about toxic relationships rather than focusing on you specifically. I laughed out loud. Even now, she's still scheming. The answer is no, obviously. The restraining order stays in place. I thought that would be your response, James said with a satisfied smile. I'll convey your decision. As I left his office, my phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Lieberman, my therapist. Dinner tonight? I've been thinking about our last conversation. Over the past year, my relationship with Dr. Lieberman had evolved from purely professional to something more personal. After my case was closed, she had referred me to a colleague for continued therapy to avoid ethical complications. We begun meeting for occasional dinners, enjoying conversations that ranged from art to philosophy to travel. At 65, Catherine Lieberman was intelligent, accomplished, and refreshingly direct. She had been widowed young, raised 2 successful children on her own, and built a respected psychology practice. Most importantly, she had her own money, her own life, and no interest in being taken care of. I'd like that, I replied to her text. That evening, as we shared a bottle of wine at a small Italian restaurant overlooking the harbor, Catherine asked about the news she heard. The rumor mill says Rebecca tried to sell her story. Are you okay? I nodded. Better than okay, actually. Every scheme she attempts just reinforces that I made the right call in pursuing all legal avenues against her. Catherine studied me with professional interest. You know, when you first came to me after discovering her betrayal, you were consumed with rage, then grief, then obsession with justice. I worried about you. But not anymore? No, she smiled. You've moved through the trauma and come out the other side. You're using what happened to you to help others. That's true healing. I considered her words. I still have nightmares sometimes, dreams where I'm drinking coffee and can't stop myself, even though I know it's poisoned. That's normal, she assured me. Trauma leaves traces. The question isn't whether the scars exist, but whether they define you. After dinner, we walked along the waterfront, the spring air carrying the scent of salt and new beginnings. Catherine slipped her hand into mine, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with revenge or justice or the past. I received a letter from Miguel last week, I said suddenly. Catherine looked surprised. The gardener? What did he want? To apologize. He's completed his sentence. 18 months for his role in the fraud. He's working construction in Arizona now, trying to start over. How did you feel reading his apology? I thought about it. Sad, mostly. He was manipulated too, not as severely as I was, but still used by Rebecca for her own ends. Did you respond? Yes. I told him I accepted his apology and wished him well. I meant it. Catherine squeezed my hand. That's grace, Andrew. Not everyone find their way there. 3 years after Rebecca's conviction, I received a call from the Connecticut State Correctional Facility. Mr. Fleming, a formal voice asked. This is Warden Marshall. I'm calling to inform you that Rebecca Wilson was involved in an incident yesterday. My pulse quickened. What kind of incident? She attempted to escape during a medical transport to the hospital. She was recaptured quickly, but she'll face additional charges that will extend her sentence significantly. I wasn't surprised. Rebecca had never been one to accept defeat or play by the rules. The escape attempt was perfectly in character for her, a final, desperate grasp for freedom that had only resulted in more confinement. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. "There's one more thing, Mr. Fleming." During processing after her recapture, we found documentation suggesting she still had access to an undiscovered account. We've notified the authorities handling the financial aspect of her case. After hanging up, I called James immediately. "Already on it," he said before I could even explain. The account was in her mother's maiden name, hidden in a small bank in the Caymans. We've frozen it and filed the appropriate motions to have the funds, about $215,000, transferred to satisfy part of the judgment against her. I whistled low. "She's persistent, I'll give her that." "Like a cockroach," James agreed. "But we're more persistent, and we have the law on our side." The next day, I visited the construction site of the Fleming Center for Reproductive Health, a state-of-the-art fertility clinic I was funding in conjunction with Yale New Haven Hospital. The framework was already in place, with workers swarming over the skeleton of what would become a beacon of hope for couples struggling with infertility. The project manager walked me through the progress, pointing out where the research laboratories would be housed, where patients would receive treatment, where the education center would offer support groups and information sessions. "We're on schedule to open next spring," he assured me. "The medical equipment installation begins in 4 months." Standing there, watching my vision take physical form, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. This was my legacy. Not the money I'd earned, not the revenge I'd taken, but the hope I was creating from the ashes of my own disappointment. Catherine joined me for lunch afterward, her eyes bright with excitement as I described the progress. "You know what I love about this project?" she asked. "It's not just about the physical aspect of fertility. You've included psychological support, counseling services, resources for adoption, and surrogacy. You're addressing the whole person, not just the medical condition." "I had good years with my first wife before infertility tore us apart," I explained. "If we had better support, more options, who knows? Maybe we would have found a different path forward together." Catherine reached across the table and took my hand. "You can't change the past, Andrew, but you're changing the future for hundreds of families. That matters." 5 years after Rebecca's conviction, I stood at the podium during the grand opening of the Fleming Center, addressing the crowd of medical professionals, potential patients, and media representatives. "Infertility can be a lonely journey," I said, scanning the faces before me. "I know that firsthand, but it doesn't have to be. With proper support, with cutting-edge research, with compassionate care, that journey can lead to unexpected destinations. Not all of them involving biological children, but all of them valuable, all of them worthy of pursuit." In the front row, Catherine smiled up at me, her hand resting on Maria's shoulder. Behind them sat James, who had become more friend than attorney over the years. Dr. Peterson, whose early detection of arsenic had saved my life, nodded approvingly from his seat near the back. "Today, we open not just a medical facility, but a center for hope," I continued. "A place where science and compassion meet, where every path to family is honored and supported." The applause was thunderous as I cut the ribbon stretched across the entrance. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for the evening news and medical journals. Afterward, as I made my way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and answering questions, a young reporter approached. "Mr. Fleming, your generosity is remarkable, especially given your personal history. Some might see this as the ultimate revenge against your ex-wife, using the money she tried to steal from you to help others achieve what she pretended to want. Would you say that's accurate?" I considered the question carefully. 5 years ago, I might have agreed. The symmetry would have appealed to me, turning Rebecca's deception into something positive, a cosmic balancing of the scales. "No," I said finally, "this isn't about revenge. Revenge is backward-looking, focused on pain already inflicted. I gestured to the building behind me. This is about the future, about creating something positive from something painful. That's not revenge. That's redemption." Later that evening, as Catherine and I sat on the terrace of my penthouse, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. "Did you ever imagine, when you first discovered Rebecca's betrayal, that you'd end up here?" Catherine asked, as if reading my thoughts. "Not in my wildest dreams." I admitted I thought my life was over, that I'd spend whatever time I had left bitter and alone. She leaned against my shoulder. "Instead, you built something meaningful. You've helped others. You found peace. And love," I added, kissing the top of her head. We'd been married for just over a year. A quiet ceremony with only close friends present, followed by a month-long trip to Italy. At 75 and 67, respectively, we had no illusions about having children together, but we'd found a different kind of family in our shared values and vision for the future. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Thought you'd want to know, Rebecca's latest parole hearing was denied. 3 more years minimum." I read the message, then set the phone aside without replying. The information registered as little more than a footnote in my life now, a distant echo of a painful chapter that no longer defined me. News about Rebecca? Catherine asked, noting my momentary distraction. Yes, but it doesn't matter anymore. She smiled, understanding. No, it doesn't. As darkness fell over the sound, lights from boats and distant shores twinkled like earthbound stars. I thought of all the twists and turns that had led me here. The betrayal that could have destroyed me, but instead had set me on a path to a different kind of fulfillment than I'd ever imagined. Rebecca had taken much from me, but she had failed in her ultimate goal. I hadn't just survived, I had thrived. My name would be associated not with a sordid tale of deception and murder, but with healing and hope. The money she had coveted now served others. The life she had tried to end now had more purpose than ever before. That was the ultimate revenge. Living well, not in spite of what she'd done, but because of how I'd chosen to respond to it. Not through bitterness or hatred, but through justice, growth, and eventually, peace. The legal system had done its job, punishing Rebecca for her crimes. But the real victory wasn't in her confinement, it was in my freedom. Freedom from the past, from anger, from a need for vengeance that once consumed me. As Catherine and I sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky, I knew with absolute certainty that I had won. Not just in court, not just in finance, but in the only arena that truly matters, the quest for a meaningful life. Rebecca might eventually leave prison, but she would never escape the consequences of her actions. I, on the other hand, had escaped the prison of victimhood. I had transformed my pain into purpose. I had taken legal revenge, yes, but more importantly, I had taken back my life and made it something better than it had ever been before. That was justice in its purest form. Not an eye for an eye, but a life well lived despite another's attempt to end it. Not mere survival, but transformation. Not just revenge, but renaissance. And in the warm spring night, with the woman I loved beside me and the future stretching bright before us, that was more than enough. Now I have a question for you. How would you act if you were in Mr. Fleming's shoes? Subscribe and stay tuned for more curious and intense stories.